Most of you know I'm just returning from 7 weeks of my sabbatical, within which I flew out to Colorado and did a 30-day silent retreat in a process developed by St Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, called the Ignatian Spiritual Exercises. It was such a privilege to do this. I realize that some people high on the extrovert scale might not think that. No thank you to 30 days of not talking or doing much of anything but prayer and contemplation. But I imagine for others of a more introvert type, it sounds pretty dreamy to cut out of a jam-packed, relentlessly scheduled life, press pause for a full month, and slow way, way down. And let me tell you, it was dreamy. Actually, I'm not sure dreamy is the accurate description of it. If anything, as the days wore on, it dawned on me that there is a level of sleepwalking or dream state that makes up my day-to-day life. And in the quiet of that setting, the silent meals, the prayer times, the slow walks, the daily watching of the sunrise over the valley from my hermitage and the sunset over the Rockies from a wooden chair swing, the absence of screens and texts and emails and scrolling, I think I saw, as you might imagine, I think I saw more of what surrounds me, more subtleties. I think I heard the life around me in a sharper way. I felt things in my own heart and soul more fully, with less distraction. Rather than dreaming, I would say it was more coming awake. And though I was alone out there, and for the most part not engaged in keeping up and keeping tabs and keeping track, I was connected in thought and prayer to my family, my friends, this community. I might say just at a deeper frequency it felt. Tracy and I spoke every 4 or 5 days during my time and had a few experiences that amazed us with how connected we realized we were despite the distance and separation. So that's my claim, that it wasn't a dreamy time of otherworldly, disconnected spiritual experience, but an immersion deeper into reality. It wasn't the physical world being shed to reach some higher spiritual plane or seek some higher spiritual plane, but the physical world becoming more sharply and distinctly spiritual, which I think is the truth of the matter. I would say that it really helped to have the Rocky Mountains as the backdrop. Whew. And that great sky and the wide expanses everywhere you turned to help me experience the sacredness of the material world. And it did make me wonder, and I wonder now poignantly, as I re-enter my day-to-day life, how much of what we do with and in our modern world actually separates us from truer life and reality. The pace we keep, how much we engage what is virtually reality and not reality, how many of our solutions to save time devours our time in the end, how what we do to make ourselves comfortable and address our pain saps us of joy as well, and so on and so forth. But if for a moment you accept my premise that my 30 days of retreat was not a retreat from reality, but an advance into it, an immersion into it, then I'd just like to share a few more things that I discovered in there. And as you see from my sermon title, I'm just going to share part of it today so I don't keep you here forever. And then another part in my sermon next week. So first of all, I'm thinking about prayer itself. communication with God. That it too, when we do it here in worship or in a quiet moment in our day, is not retreating from reality, but a practice of deeper immersion into what is real. Prayer done appropriately is not shutting our eyes to the outside world, but opening our inner eyes more fully to the truth of the outside world. Jesus is often witnessed, as in our scripture today, retreating into solitary or deserted places for prayer, not to avoid what he had to do, but to do all he had to do with an open spirit, a deeper heart, a steady commitment to seeking to stay aligned to God's direction and purpose for him. There's nothing magic in prayer, except that it can be magical at times to trust and lean into the fact that there is a higher mind, a deeper heart backing us up and leading us on. So throughout the 30 days, I would have 4 times set aside for about an hour of prayer each day, along with the general kind of prayerful state that such a time of quiet in such a setting allows. I met with a spiritual director for 30 minutes each day. That was the only time that I talked. My vocal cords at the end of the month I was literally hoarse. They were out of shape. But during that time, he would offer me guidance and prompts to direct each day's prayers. A lot of times that involved imaginative engagement with Scripture, sometimes other themes and approaches. The first of these, for those who were here at the annual meeting, I wrote about a bit in my letter to you, and that early on in my retreat, and that was the practice was to be open and receive God's love for me and reflect on what that has meant in my life. And there were 3 focus areas particular for these prayers. What have been God's gifts to you? How has God labored for you, been at work in your life? And what does God's gift of God's self in Jesus mean for your life? So those each constituted at least 1 hour of prayer, and since I returned to those over and over again throughout the month, it was much more of that in the end. So to take the first one, just to share a bit, to take the first one, it was remarkable to give a significant block of time to ponder thoroughly, list out, meditate simply on the concrete gifts God has given to me in my life. I mean, there aren't just a handful of gifts that we have been given by God, but rather large buckets full of gifts, each of which can be unpacked to reflect on for a while. Right? I mean, there's the bucket of the gift of our physicality and our physical health to start with. For all of us, fully healthy, sick, or even dying. There is enough in that bucket of our physicality to keep you going for a while in a reverie of gratitude for the miracles of our sight, our breath, our hearing, our taste, our touch, and all that those individual gifts open up to us in this existence. I mean, you just begin to dig in, and more and more and more comes out. Then there's the relationship bucket. Holy moly. There is a ton in that bucket when you sit down to think about it and unpack relationships that fill your life right now, to all those over the course of your life that you have loved, that have loved you. Consider all those who have taught you or mentored you, offering thanksgiving to God for those people in your life. All those that you've struggled with. Think about that. They could be in your bucket of gratitude too, those you haven't liked, your enemies, and what blessing God brought you through them. I mean, that's worth meditating on. And that's just 2 buckets, the physical health bucket and the relationship bucket of gratitude. Then there's the bucket of gratitude for the places that have the places that have been gifts to you, places of retreat and vacation, places of great beauty, places of education that have supported you, helped make you who you are, places of work that have kept you occupied and used your gifts. I mean, it goes on and on. And those are 3 buckets of gratitude. That you have been given, I have been given, because we are, and because we are loved. So as I was doing this deep dive into gratitude, the line from the hymn that we just sang, "Great is thy faithfulness," came to me. That line, "All I have needed, thy hand hath provided." And it struck me so deeply, that sentiment, that statement, how true that is. God, all that I have needed, all I have needed across 54 years, all I have needed, thy hand has provided. What do you do but stand in awe and say thanks? I did this massive amount of downloading of all there is in my life to be grateful for. So this is what I'm saying, which is not fantasy or a retreat from reality, but I think a greater glimpse into the truth of the matter when you stop and think about it. And that was just the first of the 3 focal points. St. Ignatian called them, that's what he called them, the 3 focal points. Consider specifically and fully God's gifts to you that are given out of love for you. Then, when you're done with that exercise, consider the second prompt, how God has labored for you. This is the prompt from St. Ignatius. God loves me so much that God enters into the very struggle of life like a potter with clay, like a mother in childbirth, and God labors us into life. How is that true in your life? How has God been active and at work in your life as you can best guess and imagine? And then also write that down point by point, what comes to you. Again, I found it amazing what dawned on me. Among other things, a significant awareness that came through this focal point of prayer was how much God has not just been active in my life, but proactive. And I mean so often way ahead of me. Before I even knew what I was going to need, the Spirit was working it. And I realized how much in my prayer life, even though I should know better, I tend to approach God as though I am trying to get his attention, God's attention. Hey, God, down here, I got this issue. Could you help me with it? Yoo-hoo, God, we've got a problem. When the truth of the matter is that God was already well at work at whatever point at which I was finally turning to God for help. Already well at work. I could give you examples over the course of my life, but I'll just give you the quickest and most obvious, my 30-day retreat. It was what I needed more than I could imagine. Well before I knew that my father would begin declining and eventually die, I set up to do this retreat. It turned out that a day and a half after his funeral in Richmond, Virginia, was when I was first sitting on that wooden bench swing in Sedalia, Colorado, watching the sunset over the Rockies and grieving his death, but in a context that gave me incredible breadth and depth and comfort to do it. And a broken open heart then for those 30 days of prayer, which made the experience all the deeper for me. God was well at work in and through me long before I had any idea how much I would need those 30 days. And that was just the most recent and obvious example. But once you take time to reflect back on your life like that, you find such moments begin to pop and shine. You see the fingerprints of God all over the place. And what can you do but say thank you to such love and such presence? Again, I'd ask, is it fantasy and retreat to believe there's a higher presence and deeper heart at work in even the minutia of our lives? Or is the greater fantasy to suggest that we are alone and make of our lives what they are, and it's all just random happenstance? I'm putting my money on God, the higher power. So, and here's where I will begin to draw this first part to a close. There's 7 parts of this sermon. No, I'm just kidding. There's just 2. And the next one's next week. I mean, there could be 7 at least, but I just want to, pressing pause and quieting down all the chatter and relinquishing the schedule and the stimulation and the grasping in the virtual world and retreating or advancing does for you what it does for you, I think, is that it becomes evident not just that there is a higher mind and a higher purpose involved in your life, but what the Christian faith holds out for and what becomes evidently true when the dust settles is that this higher presence is full of love for you. And when you relax into that reality, even for a time, it makes so much more sense of so much. All the tender delicateness of this existence, all the tragic beauty of it, all the artfulness of it, all the everything around us that is so magnificent and fascinating and touches the heart and brings tears to the eyes. How do you explain it except that it derives from a heart of love? So I'll give you another story, and I'll end with, I keep on saying I'm going to end, and I'll end with this. And then I have another story and image next week to share, but here's one for me that proclaimed the truth of the loving Creator behind it all. So there was this little man-made stream, human-made stream that the retreat center had created where the water came pouring out of the statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. That was on the property, and that's the name of the Jesuit retreat house is the Sacred Heart Retreat Center. It's a dry region and at pretty high altitude, and so they created this stream to bring more water and to create a beautiful atmosphere as well. And the stream gently wound its way around the property to eventually land in a little pond with a fountain, lily pads. And as you sat by it or walked beside it, it made the sweetest little lapping of water sound as it washed over the rocks in the bed of the stream. And at the end of it, there was this little babbling waterfall where the water would finally reach one large rock and then pour over the side and fall into the pond. So one afternoon, as the day was waning and clouds of a passing thunderstorm rolled into the distance and the blue sky was sharp and bright in the afternoon and the wet ground was sparkling, I was sitting right there near that spot. They had chairs positioned throughout the property where people would just sit. So I was sitting there in that little spot, watching the waterfall, listening to it, looking at it, breathing deeply. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a little hummingbird, so beautiful and delicate, stunning colors, flew over and hovered right there above the rock where the water was falling. And I watched it pause right above the falling water, fluttering its wings but holding its little beautiful body absolutely still. You know how they do that? Inches from the water. And then in the most delicate fashion, like the whole scene would just shatter to pieces, it lowered itself onto the rock. The wings stopped beating, and for however many seconds, it raised its little head and beak and allowed water to just rush over its chest. It gave what seemed to me to be this little shudder of bliss. Or it could have been the world around it that shuddered in bliss, beholding this moment. But it shuddered in bliss, and then it lifted off again, and in a second was gone. Now you tell me, does the beauty of that bird and that light and the way it somehow reached in and grabbed a hold of my heart, is that just the random occurrence of molecules and matter, or does the art of that moment not suggest to you an artist behind it all? Doesn't the story of that bird, however brief its life may be, however tiny its little body in the scope of the universe, suggest a storyteller behind it? And not just any storyteller either, but one who would create a world where a tiny creature shudders in bliss at the sheer pleasure of life, or one where the cosmos shudders to witness her experience of bliss. I got up after that and walked quietly to the main house where, with that image still hovering delicately in my mind and heart, I gathered with other retreatants, and we didn't talk about it. We ate our dinner in silence, each of us having our own encounters with the holy there on that hilltop in the foothills of the Rockies. There's more I'd like to share, but I'll pause there for now and allow the choir to remind us, as the deacons collect the offering, how in this world sound can be organized into song and how that can move us. Another reminder that behind it all is a composer. Behind it all is a composer who loves us and desires for that love to flow through us and out to others. Amen.